I watched the 20-ton excavator slide 15 feet down the cliff face, churning my son's future into brown slurry while the police sirens wailed in the distance. He was screaming at the operator, mud splattered all over his Italian suit, watching a geyser of brown water destroy the land he thought he just stole from me. He thought I was a senile old man who forgot to read the fine print. He didn't know I was the architect who designed the trap, and that one shovel dig just cost him $14 million. Before I show you the court documents that ruined him, hit subscribe. This is the story of the Oculus.
The fog rolls in off the Pacific like a heavy, wet curtain, muting the world to a spectrum of slate and charcoal. It clings to the wool of my blanket, beating on the fibers, smelling of brine and the deep, cold rot of the kelp beds below. I sit on the terrace of the guest cottage, a modest structure of cedar and stone that I designed as a practice in restraint, and I look down at the main stage. Below me, perched on the limestone promontory, stands the Oculus. Even now, surrounded by the debris of failed ambition, the house is magnificent. I designed it 30 years ago to be an extension of the cliff itself, a fortress of raw concrete and low iron glass that does not impose itself upon the landscape, but rather anchors it. It is a study in tension and release, a cantilevered, defiant gesture against gravity. My late wife, Catherine, used to say the house felt like holding your breath. She was right. It possesses a stillness that unnerves the chaotic mind. But today, the stillness extends beyond the architecture. It has infected the invaders. For 6 weeks, the property has been silent. The grinding roar of diesel engines, which plagued my mornings for months, has been extinguished. The frantic shouting of foremen, the beep, beep, beep of backing trucks, the desecration of the earth, it has all ceased.
I lift my teacup. It is bone china, translucent and delicate, filled with Earl Grey, steep time exactly 4 minutes. The steam rises in the cold air, twisting into the fog. I observe my hand holding the saucer. There is no tremor. The palsy I performed for the last half-year, the rhythmic shaking that convinced my son and his harpy of a wife that my neurological pathways were eroding like a sandcastle at high tide, has vanished. My grip is firm. My movements are precise. I take a sip. The bergamot is sharp, cleansing. Down on the scarred lawn, the yellow carcasses of 3 bulldozers sit motionless. They are arranged in a haphazard semicircle, like confused beasts caught in a sudden freeze. Rust has already begun to bloom on their buckets, a fine orange patina gifted by the salt spray. They were brought here to tear the Oculus down, to strip the copper from its veins and crush its concrete bones into aggregate for a subdivision of soulless beige townhomes. Preston called it maximizing the asset. I look at the chain-link fence they erected around the perimeter. It is an ugly thing. Galvanized steel and green mesh, meant to keep me out. It was meant to be the demarcation line between the future, their future, and the past, me. They banished me to this guest cottage, treating me like a squatter on my own land, a liability to be managed until I inevitably ceased to exist. Now that fence serves a different purpose. It is a containment field. It keeps the creditors in. A movement catches my eye at the base of the driveway. The electronic gates, which haven't worked since the power was cut to the construction site last week, are propped open with a pile of bricks. A sedan pulls in. It is a nondescript gray Ford, the chariot of the bureaucrat. I adjust my glasses. I do not need binoculars to know what this is. I know the schedule of their ruin better than they do. I drafted the blueprints for it, after all. A man steps out of the Ford. He is wearing a windbreaker and carrying a clipboard. He does not look at the ocean. He does not look at the architectural marvel soaring above him. He looks only at the VIN number visible through the windshield of the Porsche 911 GT3 parked haphazardly near the excavators. The Porsche is Preston's pride. He bought it 3 days after I signed the deed over to the trust. It is sleek, black, and aggressively loud, a perfect manifestation of his personality. It sits there now, coated in a layer of construction dust, looking less like a sports car and more like an abandoned toy. The man in the windbreaker checks his clipboard. He pulls a roll of blue painter's tape from his pocket. I watch, fascinated by the mechanics of consequence. It is a slow, methodical process. The man tears a strip of tape, affixes a thick envelope to the driver's side window, and then reinforces it. He takes a photograph with his phone. Then he moves to the front door of the main house. He finds the heavy pivot door locked, of course, Preston and Elena are likely inside, hiding in the dark, pretending that if they do not answer the door, the reality of their insolvency will simply lose interest and wander away. A childish structural theory. If you ignore a crack in the foundation, the building does not heal itself, it collapses. The process server tapes a second notice to the glass entry. This one is larger. Even from here I can see the bold red lettering. Notice of lien. Foreclosure proceedings. I imagine the interior of the house. I imagine them huddled in the sunken living room, perhaps arguing in hushed, venomous whispers. Elena will be pacing, her heels clicking on the terrazzo, a sound that used to grate on my nerves like sandpaper. Preston will be slumped on the B&B Italia sofa, staring at his phone, watching his credit score freefall. They are trapped in a mausoleum of their own making, imprisoned by the very legal framework they thought would liberate their inheritance. A seagull lands on the railing of my terrace. It eyes me with reptilian indifference, waiting for a crumb. "Not today," I whisper. My voice is raspy from disuse, but the diction is crisp. I look back at the bulldozers. They represent the hubris of the ignorant. Preston and Elena looked at the land and saw only surface area. They saw a view. They did not bother to understand the geology. They did not read the soil reports from 1974. They did not understand that the oculus is not just sitting on the cliff. It is pinned to the bedrock by 30-foot steel piles, integrated into a delicate drainage system that keeps the clay layer stable. They brought in heavy machinery. They started digging without understanding the load paths. They disturbed the equilibrium. And when the earth moved just a few inches, just enough to sever the drainage line and violate the conservation easement, the trap snapped shut. The man in the windbreaker gets back into his sedan. He reverses out of the driveway, his job done. I wrap the wool blanket tighter around my shoulders. The cold is biting, but it feels clean. It feels like the cold of a job site before the pour, when the rebar is laid and the forms are oiled, waiting for the concrete. The silence returns, heavier than before. It is the silence of a stopped heart. My son wanted to be a developer. He wanted to be a visionary. But he never learned the first rule of architecture. You must respect the site. You cannot force your will upon the geology. You must listen to what the ground is telling you. The ground told him to stop. He didn't listen. Now the ground owns him. I finish my tea. The dregs are bitter, but I do not mind. I set the cup down on the slate table with a soft clink. I am alone. The victory is quiet. It does not taste like champagne. It tastes like iron and ash. But as I look at the gray silhouette of my life's work, standing stoic and scarred against the horizon, I feel a profound sense of order restored. The structure holds. The parasites have been fumigated. I lean back, closing my eyes for a moment, listening to the wind whistle through the fence. Let them sit in the dark a little longer. Let them read the notices. Let them trace the cracks in their expectations. I have nowhere to be. I have plenty of time. After all, the demolition has only just begun.
The memory reconstructs itself not visually but acoustically. It begins with the sound of impact. Click, clack, click, clack. 6 months ago, the silence of the oculus was shattered by the staccato rhythm of Elena's heels striking my slate floors. It was a violent, piercing sound, the auditory equivalent of a pickaxe chipping away at a statue. The slate, quarried from the same vein as the cliffs outside, was meant to absorb the hush of the ocean, to ground the resident in the earth. Elena walked upon it as if she were testing its hardness, looking for a hollow spot to break through. I sat in my Eames lounger, the leather worn soft and warm by decades of contemplation, and watched them enter. "My God, Julian," Elena sighed, dropping her designer handbag onto a console table made of rare Brazilian rosewood. She didn't use a coaster. The metal buckles of the bag scraped against the varnish. "It's freezing in here. It's like a mausoleum." "It's passive cooling, Elena," I said, or I tried to say. The words came out slower than I intended. I was already practicing the art of diminishing myself, shrinking my presence to fit the small box they had constructed for me in their minds. "It's depressing," she declared, pulling her coat tighter. She smelled of synthetic gardenias and ambition, a cloying chemical scent that overpowered the subtle aroma of old paper and cedar that defined my study.
Behind her trailed Preston, my son, the flesh and blood legacy I had hoped would be a pillar, but who turned out to be merely drywall, soft, porous, and easily damaged. He was 45 years old, but he carried himself with the frantic energy of a teenager in debt. His suit was too tight, straining at the buttons, a failed attempt to corset his lack of discipline. Sweat already glistened on his upper lip, despite the cool air. He did not look at me, he looked at the room. His eyes darted from the floor-to-ceiling glazing to the exposed concrete coffers of the ceiling. He wasn't admiring the play of light or the structural honesty of the materials. He was doing arithmetic. I could practically hear the calculator clicking in his skull. Square footage, price per foot, demolition costs, zoning variances. "Hey, Dad," he said, his voice booming. He spoke to me as if I were standing on the other side of a canyon, or perhaps as if I were a dim-witted child who needed volume to comprehend language. "How are we feeling today? Strong? You look rested." "I am fine," I murmured, letting my hand tremble slightly as I reached for my cane. "We brought lunch," Elena announced, marching into the kitchen, "and we thought we'd celebrate. Preston has some news." I followed them, the rubber tip of my cane squeaking against the stone. I moved with a deliberate slowness, observing them like a naturalist observing an invasive species. In the kitchen, a space of minimalist stainless steel and honed basalt, Preston was already opening the wine fridge. My heart stuttered, not from frailty, but from a sudden, sharp spike of indignation. He pulled out a bottle, the 1985 Petrus. I had bought that case with Catherine the year we finished the house. We had drunk a bottle on our 25th anniversary. We had drunk one when I won the Pritzker. There were only 2 left. I was saving them. I don't know what for. Perhaps for the end of the world, or perhaps for the day I finally joined her. "Preston," I croaked. "That is—" "Red?" he interrupted, glancing at the label with the indifference one might show a carton of milk. "Yeah, looks like a red. Good, I need a drink. Traffic on the PCH was a nightmare." He didn't look for the corkscrew I kept in the velvet-lined drawer. He used a cheap serrated pocket tool from his keychain. I watched, paralyzed by the vulgarity of it, as he mangled the cork. He drove the metal spiral in with brute force, shredding the vintage oak. When he finally yanked it out, half the cork crumbled into the wine. "Whoops," he muttered. "Little texture never hurt anyone." He didn't decant it. He didn't let it breathe. He didn't search for the Riedel stemware. He opened the cupboard and grabbed 2 heavy, thick-rimmed water tumblers. He poured the deep garnet liquid into them, filling them to the brim as if it were soda. "None for you, Dad," Elena said, emerging with plastic containers of takeout salad. "Alcohol interacts with your meds. Doctor's orders." She placed a plastic fork in front of me. The salad was wilted arugula with a slimy sheen of dressing. Preston took a massive gulp of the Petrus. He didn't swirl, he didn't smell, he just swallowed. "Not bad," he said, wiping a purple stain from his lip. "A little dry for my taste. I like those fruit-forward blends." I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles turned white. It was a small thing, perhaps, in the grand scheme of betrayal, but it was a litmus test. A man who cannot appreciate the history, the labor, and the soul inside a bottle of wine will never understand the soul of a building. He will never understand legacy. He consumes, he does not curate. "So," Preston said, leaning back, the chair groaning under his weight. "The news." Elena stopped eating. She clasped her hands together, leaning forward with a predatory smile. Her teeth were very white, very straight, and entirely artificial. "We found a place, Julian, a perfect place." She slid a glossy brochure across the basalt counter. "Golden Horizons, Senior Living Community." The cover featured a stock photo of an elderly couple, racially ambiguous and terrifyingly happy, playing chess in a sunlit room that looked like a hotel lobby. "It's not a nursing home," Preston added quickly, sensing my silence. "It's a lifestyle community, assisted luxury. They have a heated pool, Dad, bingo nights, a shuttle to the mall." "A shuttle," I repeated, tasting the word. It tasted like ash. "I have a car. I have a home."
But this place, Elena gestured around the kitchen, waving her fork at the panoramic window that framed the Pacific Ocean, is too much. It's dangerous, Julian. All these stairs, the stone floors. What if you fall? What if you have another episode? They referred to a dizzy spell I'd had 2 months prior. Dehydration, nothing more. But they had seized upon it, nurtured it, watered it until it bloomed into a diagnosis of incompetence. And let's be honest, Dad, Preston said, taking another swig of the $3,000 wine. The upkeep here is drowning you. The property taxes alone, it's irresponsible to keep sitting on this. It's a liability. Liability.
There was that word. To an architect, a liability is a structural flaw, a weakness in the design that threatens the integrity of the whole. To Preston, a liability was simply anything that wasn't currently generating cash for him. I built this house, I said quietly. Catherine loved this light. Mom is gone, Dad, Preston said, his voice dropping to a register of faux somberness that was even more insulting than his shouting. She wouldn't want you rattling around in this concrete bunker all alone. She'd want you to be safe. She'd want you to be liquid. He stood up and walked to the window. He looked out at the rolling lawn that led to the cliff edge. Imagine the potential, he muttered, almost to himself. 2 acres, R3 zoning if we push for a variance. We could fit, 20 units? High-end townhomes, the Blackwood estates. It honors the name, Dad. It keeps the legacy alive. I stopped breathing. The picture clarified instantly. It wasn't just about selling the house. It was about erasure. I looked at Preston's back. I saw the way his suit jacket strained across his shoulders. I saw the greed radiating off him like heat waves from asphalt. He didn't see the cantilevered master suite that defied gravity. He didn't see the oculus in the roof that tracked the sun's path across the floor, marking the seasons like a prehistoric observatory.
He saw a demolition site. He wanted to take the oculus, my magnum opus, the sanctuary where his mother had spent her final happy years, and grind it into dust. He wanted to replace my concrete poetry with 20 units of stucco mediocrity. Beige boxes for beige people. He would slap my name on the entrance sign and count his money while I rotted in a room smelling of bleach and boiled carrots. I looked at Elena. She was watching me closely, her eyes narrowing. She was the architect of this plan. Preston was merely the contractor. She was assessing my resistance. "It's for the best, Julian," she said softly. "We just want to take care of you." I looked at the water glass full of Petrus. I looked at the brochure for Golden Horizons. Something inside me, some load-bearing wall in my soul that had been buckling under the weight of grief for 3 years, suddenly snapped back into place. The structural integrity returned, but I did not show it. I let my shoulders slump. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I stared at the brochure with the vacant, watery eyes of the defeated. "Bingo?" I asked, my voice trembling. Elena beamed. "Yes, and movie nights, and full laundry service." I am tired," I said. "I am so tired of the stairs." Preston turned around from the window, a grin splitting his face. It was the smile of a vulture that had just seen the animal stop moving. "That's sensible, Dad," he said. "That's really sensible. We'll handle the paperwork. You won't have to lift a finger." "Good," I said, closing my eyes to hide the cold, hard clarity that was forming there. "I don't want to worry anymore." They finished the wine. They ate their salad. They talked over my head about listing agents and bridge loans. They assumed the structure was vacant, ready for demolition. They didn't hear the termites in the woodwork. They didn't realize that the rot they perceived was a projection of their own decay. And they certainly didn't suspect that the tired old man in the chair was already drafting the blueprints for their collapse.
The house had ceased to be a home weeks ago. It was now a staging ground for a hostile takeover. I had become a ghost in my own hallways, drifting silently across the terrazzo in my slippers, a spectral presence that the invaders chose to ignore unless they required a signature. They had set up a command center in the library, My library, the room where I had sketched the initial elevations for the Oculus, the room where Catherine had read Chekhov in the slant of the afternoon sun, was now a war room of commerce. The air, once scented with old vellum and dried tobacco, now stank of ozone from laser printers and the lingering metallic tang of Diet Coke. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The fog had lifted, revealing a coastline that looked deceptively serene. I was making my way to the kitchen for water, a task I performed with exaggerated slowness, shuffling my feet, keeping my head bowed. I had learned that the more pathetic I appeared, the more invisible I became. They spoke freely around me, as one might speak in front of a house cat, assuming the creature understands tone but not content. But today, the library door was cracked open, and I did not enter. I stopped in the shadow of the corridor, pressing myself against the cool plaster of the wall. The grating is going to be a bitch, Preston.
The voice belonged to a man I didn't know. A contractor, likely. One of the yes men Preston surrounded himself with. Men who wore shiny suits and spoke in buzzwords. "Don't worry about the grating," Preston's voice boomed. He was agitated, pacing. I could hear the heavy tread of his loafers. "Just tell me the timeline. If we close the transfer on the 1st, when can we break ground?" "We need the permits," the stranger said, "and the demo crew needs access. That concrete structure, it's going to take some serious heavy machinery to bring it down. It's built like a bunker." My hand tightened on the handle of my cane. A bunker. Yes, I had built it to withstand the wind, the salt, the seismic shifts of the California coast. I had built it to last 300 years. "So bring in the heavy machinery," Elena interjected. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of the conversation like a diamond saw. "I want this eyesore gone, Mike. I want a clean slate. We need the model unit up by spring if we want to hit the pre-sale targets." "And what about your father?" the stranger asked, "if he's still living in the guest cottage."
There was a pause, a silence that stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then Preston laughed. It was a sound I had not heard since he was a child bullying the neighbor's dog, a wet, cruel sound devoid of empathy. "Don't worry about the old man," Preston said. "He thinks he's moving to a resort. By the time he realizes he's in a state-subsidized warehouse, the ink will be dry." "But the noise," the contractor pressed. "The demolition, it's going to be violent." "Let it be violent," Preston snapped. "Tear it down to the bedrock. The old man won't know the difference. His brain is Swiss cheese. Honestly, Mike, he'll probably be dead before the framing is up. He'll be dead before the framing is up." The sentence hit me with the physical force of a shear wall failure. In engineering, shear force is the unaligned force pushing one part of a body in one specific direction and another part of the body in the opposite direction. If the material is not strong enough, it rips apart. For years, I had lived in a state of tension. The love for my son pushing one way, the reality of his character pushing the other. I had made excuses. I had blamed his mother's spoiling, the culture, the economy. I had told myself he was merely misguided, a boy looking for a shortcut. But that sentence snapped the tension. The material failed. The bond between father and son didn't just crack, it pulverized.
I stood in the hallway, staring at a dust mote floating in a shaft of light. My heart did not race. My breath did not hitch. Instead, a profound coldness settled over me. It was the temperature of deep poor concrete setting in winter. I did not mourn. Mourning implies a loss of something that still holds value. I realized then that I had lost nothing, because the son I loved was a fiction I had designed in my head. The man in the library was a stranger, a predator, and one does not mourn a predator. One traps it. I turned away from the library door. I did not shuffle. I walked, silent, purposeful. I went to my private study at the north end of the house. This was the only room they had not yet invaded, mostly because it smelled of ammonia and lacked a television. I entered and turned the heavy brass lock. Click. The room was dim, the blinds drawn. One wall was dominated by a photograph of Catherine, taken on the site before the foundation was poured. She was laughing, the wind whipping her hair across her face, pointing at the horizon. I looked at her. "I'm sorry, my love," I whispered, "but our son is a structural defect." I walked past the photo to the flat files, the wide, shallow drawers that held the blueprints of my life. I didn't open the drawer labeled The Oculus, Architectural. I knew every line of that drawing by heart. I knew the rebar schedule, the concrete mix ratios, the tension cables in the roof. I opened the bottom drawer, the one labeled Site, Geological and Survey, 1974. The smell of old diazo prints wafted up, a sharp chemical nostalgia. I pulled out a thick roll of mylar and spread it across my drafting table, weighing down the corners with smooth river stones I kept for this purpose. I switched on the task lamp. The beam of light hit the topography lines. I traced the contours of the cliff. I ran my finger along the jagged line of the coastline. And there, buried in the cross-section notations, was the weapon. Subsurface stratification, Class 4 marine clay over fractured shale. Hydrology note, high water table, active percolation layer at 15 feet. I remembered the day the geotechnical engineer, a dour Scotsman named McGregor, had handed me this report 50 years ago. "It's a beautiful spot, Julian," he had said, "but it's a house of cards. You disturb that toe of the slope, you puncture that clay layer, and the whole bloody hill turns into soup. You have to pin it. You have to float the house, not bury it."
I had listened. I had designed a foundation system of caissons, steel stilts, that pierced the unstable clay and anchored deep into the solid rock below. The house didn't sit on the soil, it hovered above it. We had barely scratched the surface of the earth. We had respected the geology. Preston wanted to dig. He wanted basements. He wanted underground parking for his townhomes. He wanted to tear it down to the bedrock. If he did that, if he removed the overburden and cut into the slope with heavy excavators, he wouldn't hit bedrock, he would hit the water table. He would trigger a liquefaction event. The clay would lose all shear strength and behave like a liquid. The slope would fail. The road below would be inundated. But the geology was only the ammunition. I needed a delivery system. I needed a mechanism to ensure that when the disaster happened, he couldn't simply declare bankruptcy and walk away. I dug deeper into the file. I found the document I was looking for. The yellowed paper was brittle, but the county seal was still embossed in gold. The Coastal Watershed Conservation Easement, 1976. I had signed this voluntarily to lower my property taxes in the 70s. It was a restrictive covenant that ran with the land. It strictly prohibited, quote, any excavation, grading, or subsurface disruption exceeding 3 feet in depth to protect the natural drainage of the cliff. The penalty for violating the easement wasn't a fine, it was remediation. The law stated that if the easement was violated, the owner was personally responsible for restoring the land to its original condition, not repairing it, restoring it. If Preston triggered a slide, he wouldn't just be fined, he would be legally compelled by the state to rebuild the entire cliff face. The cost would be astronomical, tens of millions. It would exceed the value of the land, the value of his development, and the value of every asset he possessed. I stared at the documents. The blueprint for his destruction was right here, written in the language of soil mechanics and municipal code. He saw the house as an asset. He didn't understand that the house was the only thing holding the hill together. I took a sheet of fresh vellum. I took my favorite pen, a Rotring Rapidograph with a .35mm nib. I sat down. I stopped shaking.
I began to draft the terms of the transfer of ownership. I would need to structure it carefully. I would need to create a trust, the Blackwood Preservation Trust. That sounded noble. A vehicle to avoid inheritance tax. That was the bait. Greed would blind him to the details. But inside the trust documents, I would embed the assumption of liability clause. I would reference the 1976 easement explicitly, but only by its file number, buried in the appendices. I would make him sign a document acknowledging that he had conducted full due diligence regarding soil stability and environmental restrictions. He wouldn't read it. He never read the footnotes. He only read the headlines. I worked through the afternoon. The fog began to roll back in, turning the window gray. I felt a strange surge of energy, a vitality I hadn't felt in years. It was the thrill of the design process. I was no longer the frail, discarded father. I was the architect. I was designing a trap. The structure would be elegant. The facade would be beautiful, a gift of a multi-million-dollar estate. But the foundation would be designed to fail the moment he applied the weight of his greed to it.
I finished the rough draft as the sun set. I looked down at my handwriting. It was sharp, angular, lacking the tremor of age. "You want the bedrock, Preston?" I whispered to the empty room. "I will give you the bedrock, and it will bury you." I rolled up the Mylar survey. I placed the easement document in a fresh manila folder. I unlocked the door. I assumed the hunch of the elderly. I let my mouth slacken. I shuffled out into the hallway, heading toward the kitchen to heat up a can of soup. As I passed the library, I heard them laughing. They were toasting with my whiskey now. "To the future," Preston said. "To the future," Elena chimed in. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I just kept walking, listening to the beautiful, invisible sound of the ground waiting to open up beneath their feet.
The conference table in the dining room was a slab of polished walnut, long enough to seat 20, but today it was occupied by only 4. Myself, Preston, Elena, and a notary public named Mr. Henderson, who smelled faintly of stale tobacco and breath mints. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the peculiar static of impending theft. I had staged the scene with the precision of a set designer. The blinds were half drawn, casting the room in a twilight gloom that concealed the sharpness of my eyes. A glass of water sat to my right. A bottle of pills, vitamins labeled as heart medication, sat to my left. In the center of the table lay the stack of documents, 2 inches of bonded paper, the blueprints of their demise. "Dad, we just need you to initial here, here, and here," Preston said, tapping the pages with a manicured fingernail. He was vibrating with adrenaline. He looked like a man standing before a slot machine that had already begun to spin. I stared at the paper. I let my jaw go slack. I reached for the water glass, orchestrating a tremor in my left hand. It started as a subtle vibration in the wrist, then escalated to a rhythmic shake. The water sloshed against the rim. Clink, clink, clink. I brought the glass to my lips and allowed a small stream of water to spill down my chin, dripping onto the collar of my cardigan.
"Oh, for Christ's sake," Preston muttered under his breath. Elena shot him a warning look, then turned a beatific plastic smile toward me. She reached out and dabbed my chin with a napkin. Her touch was light, cold, and entirely devoid of affection. It was the way one wipes a spill off a countertop. "It's okay, Julian," she cooed. "Take your time. We have all day." I don't understand," I stammered, my voice breaking. "Why so many pages?" "It's the standard transfer, Dad," Preston said, pushing the pen toward me. "Just like we talked about. You move to Golden Horizons, we take care of the house. We take the burden off your shoulders." "The tax," I whispered. I leaned in, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial rasp. "The government. They take 40%. Elena's ears practically swiveled. The number hung in the air like fresh meat. 40%? She repeated. "If I die, with the house in my name," I said, nodding slowly. "Inheritance tax, estate tax. They will gut the legacy." I saw the panic flare in their eyes. They had already spent the money in their heads. The idea of losing nearly half of it to the IRS was physically painful to them. "So," I continued, pointing a shaking finger at the document entitled The Blackwood Preservation Trust, "I had my lawyer draw this up. A trust." "A trust?" Preston asked, squinting at the bold heading. "It bypasses probate." I lied. It didn't just bypass probate, it was a cage. It transfers the asset immediately. No tax. 0. The greed washed over their faces, erasing any lingering caution. They didn't see a legal document anymore. They saw a winning lottery ticket. They saw tax evasion. They saw free money. "That's brilliant, Dad," Preston said, his voice dropping to a whisper as if we were co-conspirators. "You're sharp today." "I have my moments," I said. I turned the page to section 14.c, Environmental Stewardship and Liability Assumption. The text was dense, single-spaced, Times New Roman size 10. To the uninitiated, it looked like standard boilerplate about maintaining the garden.
"What's this?" Preston asked, his pen hovering over the page. My heart rate did not spike. I had rehearsed this. Just the garden, I mumbled, waving a hand dismissively. The county, strict about the hydrangeas. The trust says you have to keep the view. Right, the view, Preston said, laughing. Don't worry, Dad, we'll keep the view. He didn't read the paragraph. He didn't read the sentence that stated, the trustee and beneficiaries, Preston Blackwood, Elena Blackwood, hereby assume absolute personal and unlimited liability for all pre-existing and future environmental conditions, including but not limited to subsurface soil stability Class 4 compliance and remediation orders pursuant to the 1976 watershed easement. He didn't know that Class 4 stability meant the land was essentially a pile of wet clay held together by prayer and my engineering. He didn't know that by signing as trustees, they were piercing the corporate veil. They weren't shielding themselves with an LLC. They were putting their own necks on the chopping block. If the cliff failed, the cost wouldn't just bankrupt a shell company. It would take their condo. It would take their savings. It would garnish their wages until they died. Sign here, I said, pointing to the line. Preston signed. His signature was large, loopy, arrogant. He pressed down so hard he nearly tore the paper. Elena signed next. Her hand was steady. She was already mentally decorating the new townhouses. And here, I said, turning to the addendum. They signed again. And the acknowledgement of due diligence, I added softly. Yeah, we know the house is old, Dad, Preston said, signing the waiver that confirmed he had inspected the geological reports I knew he hadn't even looked for. The notary stamped the documents. Thud. Thud. The sound was final. It sounded like the closing of a prison cell door.
Done, Preston exhaled, tossing the pen onto the table. He stood up, stretching his arms over his head. That wasn't so hard, was it? He picked up the deed, the executed deed, and held it up to the light. He looked at it with the reverence one might show a holy relic. You won't regret this, Julian, Elena said, patting my shoulder. She was already checking her watch. We should get going. The movers are coming for you on Tuesday. Tuesday, I repeated. Yes. We're going to celebrate, Preston said. Dinner at Nobu. You want us to bring you back something? Maybe some miso soup? No, I said. I am tired. I will rest. Suit yourself, Preston said. He grabbed the folder. He grabbed the keys to the house, my keys, off the table. They walked out of the dining room without looking back. I heard their footsteps on the slate in the hallway, fast, energetic, victorious. I heard the front door open and close. I heard the Porsche engine roar to life, a guttural scream of horsepower and hubris. Silence rushed back into the room, filling the vacuum they left behind. I sat there for a long moment. Then I reached for the napkin Elena had used to wipe my face. I folded it neatly and set it aside. I picked up the glass of water. I held it in front of my face. The water was perfectly still. The surface was a mirror. There was no tremor.
Tuesday, I said to the empty room. My voice was strong. Tuesday, the demolition begins. They had built a castle in the air. They had signed their names to a dream, but they had failed to check the scaffolding. I stood up and walked to the window to watch them drive away. They were speeding. They were always speeding. I touched the cold glass. The legal trap was set. Now, all I needed was for them to strike the match. All I needed was for them to break the ground. I went to the kitchen and poured the rest of the 1985 Petrus down the sink. It was tainted by their touch. I would not drink it. I would drink water. Clear, cold, uncompromising water. The renovation was over. The demolition was about to begin.
Golden Horizons is a masterpiece of deception. The lobby is designed to resemble a boutique hotel, plush carpets, fresh flowers, a piano that plays itself. But the moment the elevator doors close and you ascend to the memory care wing, the facade cracks. The air changes. It ceases to smell of potpourri and begins to smell of institutional despair, industrial bleach, boiled cabbage, and the faint ammonia-sharp tang of incontinence masked by synthetic lavender. I am in room 314. It is a square box with rounded corners, designed to prevent the elderly from bruising themselves on the geometry of the world. The walls are painted a color the brochure calls sunrise butter, but which looks more like jaundice. I have been here for 3 days. The staff, cheery young women in pastel scrubs who speak to me in the high-pitched, sing-song voice one uses for a golden retriever, have urged me to unpack. "Make it homey, Mr. Blackwood," they chirp. "Put up your pictures." I have not unpacked. My suitcase stands by the door, zipped and locked. I sit in the ergonomic armchair, wearing my charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and my polished Oxfords. I am not a resident. I am a traveler, waiting for a connecting flight.
On the bedside table, next to a plastic pitcher of lukewarm water, sits my laptop. The screen glows with a grainy, high-contrast image. Preston, in his haste to seize the kingdom, forgot to cancel the security contract. He changed the locks, yes, he changed the deed, but he did not think to change the IP address of the perimeter surveillance system. He assumed I was too senile to remember the password. He underestimated the persistence of memory. I glanced at the digital clock on the nightstand. 7:58 a.m. I pick up my burner phone, a cheap prepaid device I purchased with cash 2 weeks ago. I dial a number I committed to memory in 1996. "Regional EPA, Director's Office," a secretary answers. "This is Julian Blackwood," I say. My voice is not the trembling rasp of the dementia patient I played for my son. It is the baritone of the man who designed the city's municipal courthouse. "I need to speak with Robert Vance, immediately." "Mr. Vance is in a meeting. Tell him it concerns the coastal watershed. Tell him the Oculus easement is about to be breached. Tell him he owes me for the structural reinforcement on the Marina District retrofit." There is a pause. A click.
"Julian?" Robert's voice is gruff, surprised. "I thought you were... well, I heard you retired." "I am retired, Robert, but the geology is not. My son is currently on the site. He has heavy machinery. He intends to excavate the north slope within the hour." "The north slope?" I can hear the rustle of papers, the sudden alertness in his tone. "That's a Class 4 drainage zone. There's a moratorium on grading there." "He doesn't know that," I say, calmly. "He waived the due diligence, but I am telling you, as the former architect of record, that if he cuts into the toe of that slope with a 3-ton bucket, he is going to puncture the clay cap. The aquifer is pressurized, Robert. If he breaks the seal, you're going to have 50,000 gallons of slurry on the access road before lunch." "Jesus," Robert breathes. "I tried to tell him," I lie, injecting a tragic frailty into my voice. "But he wouldn't listen. He has the excavators idling right now. You might want to send a team. And Robert, bring the enforcement paperwork." I hang up. I remove the SIM card from the phone and drop it into the glass of water. I turn my attention to the laptop screen. The feed is silent, but the violence is evident. The camera's mounted on the eaves of the garage, looking down at the sweeping lawn that separates the house from the cliff edge. The fog is burning off, revealing the bright, harsh sun of a California morning. The site looks like a battlefield. The grass, once manicured to the texture of velvet, is churned into mud tracks. 3 excavators, massive yellow Komatsu beasts, are positioned in a phalanx. I see Preston. He is wearing a pristine white hard hat and a safety vest over his suit. He looks ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up. He is waving his arms, gesturing at the foreman. I can imagine his shouting, "Get on with it! Time is money!" Elena is there too, standing well back near the patio, holding a Starbucks cup. She is filming the demolition on her phone, likely for social media. Hashtag new beginnings, hashtag development, hashtag bye-bye old house. The foreman climbs into the lead excavator. Black smoke puffs from the exhaust stack as the diesel engine roars to life. The hydraulic arm lifts, the bucket curling like a clenched fist. I lean closer to the screen. "Careful," I whisper. The plan calls for them to dig out the foundation for the townhouses. To do that, they have to cut a bench into the slope. They have to remove the overburden, the weight of the earth that keeps the hydrostatic pressure in check. The excavator tracks forward. The metal teeth of the bucket bite into the soil. The first scoop is uneventful, just topsoil and grass roots. Preston claps his hands. The second scoop goes deeper, brown earth. The third scoop hits the clay layer. From my vantage point in the nursing home, miles away, I know exactly what the soil feels like. It is gray, slick, and deceptively firm.
It is thixotropic marine clay. As long as it is undisturbed, it is solid. But if you vibrate it, if you shock it with the violence of a 3-ton impact, it loses its sheer strength. It turns into a liquid. The operator goes for the 4th scoop. He digs aggressively, trying to impress the client. Snap. I don't hear it, but I see it.
The bucket tears through the gray layer. Immediately, the physics of the slope changes. It is not a slow crumble, it is a liquefaction event. A jet of water, brown and muddy, bursts from the cut like an arterial spray. The aquifer, trapped under pressure for 10,000 years, has found a release valve. The ground beneath the excavator's tracks turns into soup. The machine, weighing 20 tons, suddenly loses its purchase. It tilts violently to the right. The operator swings the boom in a panic, trying to counterbalance, but there is nothing to push against. The earth is no longer earth, it is a fluid. The excavator slides. It doesn't fall off the cliff. I calculated the runout zone carefully, but it slides 15 feet down the slope, slewing sideways, churning the hillside into a brown, frothing slurry. Preston freezes. I see him stumble back, his mouth forming a perfect O. Elena drops her coffee. The water continues to gush. It is not a trickle, it is a torrent. It mixes with the loose soil, creating a mud flow that accelerates down the access road. It tears through the chain-link fence as if it were made of spider webs. The hillside is bleeding.
On the screen, chaos erupts. Workmen are running. The operator scrambles out of the tilted cab, slipping in the mud. And then the second wave arrives. A black SUV with government plates screeches up the driveway, followed by 2 white sedans with the city seal on the doors. Robert Vance did not waste time. Men in windbreakers swarm the site. I see Robert, older now, heavier but still imposing, step out of the SUV. He doesn't look at the view, he looks at the mud, he looks at the breach. He walks straight up to Preston. Preston is trying to wipe the mud off his Italian loafers. He starts pointing at the excavator, likely blaming the operator, blaming the equipment, blaming the world. Robert ignores him. He pulls a sheaf of papers from his jacket. He doesn't hand them to Preston. He slaps them against the chest of the man in the safety vest. Then Robert walks to the gate. He takes a roll of red tape. Red, not yellow. Yellow is for caution. Red is for immediate cessation of all activity under penalty of federal law. He tapes the stop work order to the main pillar. The camera captures the moment perfectly. Preston stands amidst the ruins of the lawn, the excavator half buried in the mud he unleashed, the water table draining the property's value gallon by gallon. He looks small. He looks like a man who has just realized that the ground he stands on is not his own. I sit back in my chair in room 314. The air in the room is still stale. The walls are still jaundice yellow, but I feel a rush of oxygen. The trap has sprung. The foundation has failed. The asset is now a liability. My phone rings. It is Preston. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answer. I summon the tremor back into my voice. I summon the confusion. Hello? Preston? Is that you? Did you bring me the miso soup? Dad! Preston screams. His voice is high, frantic, cracking with hysteria. Dad, the fucking hill collapsed. There's mud everywhere. The EPA is here. Mud? I ask innocently. Oh dear, it must be the rain. Did it rain? No, it didn't rain. We dug a hole and the whole thing exploded. They're shutting us down, Dad. They're talking about fines, massive fines. Oh, I say, that sounds expensive. Expensive? It's a disaster. They're saying the deed. Dad, the deed says we are liable, me and Elena.
Well, I say, letting the mask slip just a fraction, just enough for the cold steel to peek through. You did want to own the land, Preston. You wanted the bedrock. What? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the structural integrity of greed, son. Dad? Dad, you're not making sense. I am making perfect sense, I say, my voice steadying, becoming the voice of the architect once more. You built on a foundation of theft. Did you really think it would hold? Dad? I hang up. I stand up. I button my suit jacket. I pick up my suitcase. I walk out of room 314. Mr. Blackwood, a nurse calls out from the station. Where are you going? Is everything all right? Everything is structurally sound, I tell her. I'm checking out. The renovation is complete. I walk toward the automatic doors. Outside, the sun is shining. I need to call a cab. I have a meeting with my bank to arrange the purchase of a distressed property. I suspect the price will be dropping significantly by the afternoon.
The conference room at the firm of Sterling, Holt and Vance is designed to intimidate. It is located on the 42nd floor, wrapped in glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that reduces human beings to the size of ants. The air conditioning is set to a sterile 68 degrees. The silence is not peaceful, it is pressurized. I sit at the far end of the mahogany table, a ghost in a charcoal suit. My hands are folded in my lap. I am watching the condensation drip down the side of a pitcher of ice water, counting the drops. 1, 2, 3. Opposite me, Preston and Elena are disintegrating. It has been 72 hours since the hillside collapsed. In that time, Preston has aged 10 years. His skin, usually tanned from golf weekends in Palm Springs, is the color of uncooked dough. His eyes are red-rimmed, darting frantically around the room like a trapped animal looking for a ventilation shaft. He has not shaved. The collar of his shirt is unbuttoned, his tie pulled loose, a visual admission of defeat. Elena is worse. She is vibrating with a manic, suppressed energy. Her makeup is perfect, but applied too heavily, a brittle mask trying to hide the terror underneath. She keeps tapping her fingernails on the polished wood. Click, click, click. It sounds like a beetle trying to escape a jar.
At the head of the table sits Robert Vance, the regional director of the EPA, and flanked by 2 attorneys from the city planning department. They are not smiling. They are not here to negotiate. They are here to read the autopsy report. "Let's be clear about the situation, Mr. Blackwood," Robert says, sliding a thick document across the table. The sound of the paper sliding is loud in the quiet room. "The site is currently classified as a geohazard zone. The breach of the aquifer has destabilized approximately 3 acres of coastal bluff. The slide has compromised the structural integrity of the public access road below and contaminated the marine sanctuary with sediment." Preston wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. "Look, we'll clean it up," he stammers. His voice is thin, reedy. "I have a crew. We'll get some bobcats out there, scrape the mud off." "You will not touch that site with so much as a shovel," Robert interrupts, his voice dropping an octave. "The stop work order is absolute. The moment you pierced the clay cap, you triggered the federal remediation clause of the 1976 conservation easement." "So what does that mean?" Elena snaps. "Just tell us the fine. How much is the ticket?" She reaches for her checkbook. The gesture is so pitifully arrogant, I almost laugh. She thinks she can write a check to physics. The city attorney, a woman with glasses that reflect the cold light of the room, speaks up. "Mrs. Blackwood, this isn't a parking ticket. This is a remediation order. You are required by law to restore the hillside to its pre-disturbance condition. That involves drilling 40-foot caissons to re-anchor the slope, importing engineered soil, and rebuilding the drainage table." "Okay," Preston says, swallowing hard. "Okay, and what does that cost?" The attorney checks her notes. "Preliminary engineering estimates put the stabilization work at $12 million. The environmental fines for the watershed violation will likely add another $2 million. The silence that follows is total. It sucks the air out of the room. $14 million.
I see the number hit Preston like a physical blow. He slumps back in his chair. Elena stops tapping. Her mouth opens, but no sound comes out. We don't have $14 million, Preston whispers. "Then you have a problem," Robert says, "because the liability is personal." "No," Elena says, her voice rising. "No, no, no. The property is in a trust, the Blackwood Preservation Trust. It's a separate entity. If the trust goes bankrupt, you take the land. Fine, take it. It's just dirt." She looks at Preston, desperate for confirmation. "Right? We just walk away. We give them the keys." The city attorney sighs. It is the sigh of a predator who is bored with the prey. "I'm afraid you didn't read the trust documents very carefully, Mrs. Blackwood," the attorney says. "The trust structure you executed," she glances down at the papers, "specifically designates the trustees, that is, you and your husband, as the sole guarantors of environmental compliance. Section 14, paragraph C. You accepted absolute personal liability for any disturbance of the soil." That can't be right," Preston stammers. My dad's lawyer drew that up. It was for taxes. It was just for taxes.
He turns to look at me. For the first time in the meeting, all eyes turn to the end of the table, to the frail, senile old man who has been staring at a water pitcher. "Dad," Preston pleads, tell them it was just a tax thing. You didn't mean to. You didn't know about the clay, right? You just wanted to save us the inheritance tax." I look at him. I look at the sweat glistening on his forehead. I look at the terror in his eyes. I look at the son who looked at my life's work and saw only a demolition site. Slowly, deliberately, I reach for the crystal pitcher. I pour a glass of water. My hand is rock steady. There is no shake, no rattle of ice against glass. I fill it to the brim, perfect surface tension. I take a sip. I set the glass down. I sit up straighter. My shoulders, which have been hunched for months, roll back. I adjust my cufflinks. "Preston," I say. The voice is not the wheezing whisper they're used to. It is the voice that commanded construction sites for 40 years. It is deep, resonant, and cold as steel. "I did not simply want to save you the tax," I continue, my diction precise. "I wanted to ensure that the stewardship of the land was placed in hands that understood the consequences of greed."
Preston blinks, recoiling as if I had slapped him. "Dad, your voice." "My voice is fine, Preston. My mind is fine. It has always been fine." I stand up. I walk slowly to the window, looking out at the city. "You see," I say, turning back to face them, "a building is only as strong as its foundation. If you build on a lie, it collapses. You assumed I was broken. You assumed I was debris to be cleared away. You were so busy calculating the square footage of your townhouses that you failed to perform the most basic due diligence. You knew," Elena whispers. Her face is pale, her eyes wide with a dawning, horrific comprehension. "You knew about the clay." "I wrote the survey," I say, "in 1974. I designed the drainage system you destroyed. I warned you implicitly in the documents you signed. I told you specifically about the easement, but you didn't read it, did you? You saw zero tax and you stopped reading." I walk back to the table and lean over it, placing my hands flat on the mahogany. I look directly into Preston's eyes.
"You called my home an asset. You called me a liability. Now you have inverted the equation. The house is worthless to you. You cannot build on it, you cannot sell it, and you cannot give it away because no one will take the debt attached to it. It is a millstone." "You set us up," Preston rasps. Tears are leaking out of his eyes now. "You're my father. How could you do this?" "I am teaching you the lesson you refused to learn in childhood. Actions have structural consequences. You wanted the bedrock, Preston? You have it. You are now personally liable for $14 million in remediation. The EPA will attach liens to your condo, your accounts, your cars, and your future earnings until the debt is paid." "You crazy old bastard!" Elena screams.
She lunges up from her chair. It is a primal, ugly sound, the shriek of a vulture realizing the carcass is poisoned. "We'll sue you. We'll prove you were incompetent. We'll invalidate the trust." "On what grounds?" I ask calmly. "I have the medical records from my private physician, dated the day before we signed, certifying my complete cognitive health. I have the video footage of the signing where you coerced me, and I have the signed waiver where you, of your own free will, declined a geological inspection." I turn to the attorneys. "Gentlemen, I believe my business here is concluded. The liability lies with the trustees. I am merely the beneficiary of a life estate, which, given the condition of the property, I can no longer inhabit." "Dad, please," Preston sobs. He puts his head in his hands. "We're ruined. We'll lose everything." "Yes," I say, "you will." I pick up my cane, not because I need it, but because it is a prop in the theater of their misery. You wanted to liquidate my legacy, Preston. Instead, you have liquidated yourself.
I turn and walk toward the door. Behind me, the room dissolves into chaos.
Elena is screaming at the lawyers, a high, thin sound of absolute panic. Preston is weeping, a broken man in a ruined suit. I do not look back. I step out into the hallway and press the button for the elevator. When the doors open, I step inside and press the button for the lobby. As the doors slide shut, cutting off the sound of their destruction, I catch my reflection in the polished brass of the control panel. I look old. I look tired. But I look standing. The demolition is complete. All that remains now is to clear the debris.
The paperwork for the bankruptcy proceedings was finalized on a Thursday. It arrived in a heavy cream-colored envelope delivered not by a courier, but by the Postal Service. It was the final invoice for a failed life. I did not attend the auction. I did not need to see the spectacle of their liquidation to understand its totality. I saw the catalog, though. I saw Lot 402, 2024 Porsche 911 GT3, black, seizure's title. It sold for 60 cents on the dollar to a dentist from Arizona. I saw Lot 515, collection of diamond and platinum jewelry, Elena's investments. They were sold by weight, stripped of their settings, reduced to their raw mineral value. Their condo in the city is gone. The bank took it to satisfy the liens. Preston and Elena are currently living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment in the valley, a place with thin walls and a view of a strip mall. I am told Preston is driving for a rideshare service. I imagine him watching the meter tick up, counting pennies where he once counted millions. The silence they left behind is expensive, but I can afford it. The bank, terrified of the liability attached to the Oculus and the active EPA remediation orders, was desperate to offload the toxic asset. They didn't care about the architecture, they only saw the red ink. I created a shell company, Stylobate Holdings LLC. A stylobate is the top step of the crepidoma, the platform on which the columns of a temple stand. It is the floor of the gods. Through this entity, I purchased the distressed note from the bank. I bought my own kingdom back for a fraction of its market value.
I drove up the coast this morning. The stop work tape was peeling in the wind, a tattered ribbon of plastic. I cut it away with a pair of shears. The electronic gates groaned as they opened. The hinges need oiling, but they opened. I parked my vintage Mercedes in its designated spot. I walked past the scar. The north slope is ugly. The mud flow has dried into a crusted brown scab that mars the green perfection of the landscape. The chain-link fence is twisted metal. The vegetation is gone. It looks like a wound that has been cauterized but not healed. But there are no excavators. There are no shouting men in neon vests.
Instead, there is Mr. Yamamoto. He's a landscape architect I worked with 20 years ago. He is 70 now, a man of few words who understands that a garden is not a collection of plants, but a manipulation of space. He stands by the edge of the breach, holding a soil probe. "It will take time, Julian," he says softly, looking at the damage. "We must pin the slope first, helical piers. Then we rebuild the drainage. We will plant native rye to hold the topsoil." "Do it," I say. "Take as long as you need, but no heavy machinery. We do it by hand. We respect the clay." "By hand," he agrees. He bows slightly. He understands. He is a craftsman, not a developer. I leave him to his work and enter the house. The interior is cold. The air is stagnant, holding the phantom scent of Elena's perfume, which hangs in the hallway like a bad memory. I open the windows. The Pacific breeze rushes in, salty and clean, scrubbing the atmosphere.
I walk through the rooms. The furniture is still here. Preston didn't have time to sell it before the assets were frozen. I run my hand along the back of the B&B Italia sofa. It is just an object. It has no loyalty. I go to the kitchen. I take a glass from the cupboard, a crystal tumbler, not the heavy water glass Preston used. I fill it with tap water. I walk into the cantilevered living room. This is the room that won the Pritzker. The floor-to-ceiling glass dissolves the boundary between the interior and the horizon. You do not look at the ocean here. You float above it. I sit in my Eames chair. The leather creaks, a familiar, welcoming sound. I look out at the gray water. The tide is coming in, hammering against the cliffs below. Crash, hiss, crash, hiss. It is the heartbeat of the world. I am alone. The silence is absolute. There is no phone ringing. There are no frantic negotiations. There is no son waiting to inherit, no daughter-in-law measuring the drapes for a coffin. I think of Preston. I feel a phantom pain, like an amputated limb that still itches in the rain.
I mourn the boy he was, the child who used to build sandcastles on the beach below, asking me to help him make the walls stronger. I do not mourn the man he became. The man he became was a structural threat, a load-bearing failure. I had to demolish the relationship to save the foundation. I look at the empty chair opposite me. Catherine's chair. "It is done, my love," I whisper. "The house is safe." I imagine her nodding. She would have hated the cruelty of it, perhaps. She was softer than I. But she understood protection. She understood that a legacy is not given, it is maintained. The sun begins to set, casting long, sharp shadows across the slate floor. The light turns the ocean to hammered copper. It is a lonely victory. The house is empty. The lineage ends with me. When I die, this place will likely become a museum or a trust for the arts. It will not stay in the blood. But that is acceptable. Better the house stands as a monument to art than falls as a monument to greed.
I take a sip of water. It is cool and clear. I close my eyes and listen to the house settle as the temperature drops. The steel contracts. The concrete cools. The structure breathes. It is strong. It is sound. The termites have been exterminated. The rot has been cut out. I am the architect of my own solitude, and the view is magnificent.